Hey guys, Chris from Average Eskate Reviews here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Exway Flex Pro. Now we've had this board for about 4 or 5 weeks. Exway did send it to us before launch, but they haven't seen this video before I've posted it, and they have no influence in what we say on the video. Of course, companies are notoriously going to want you to take all the bad bits out. We don't do that. I'll always give you the videos as I see them. Regardless of what you might think, these videos aren't impacted or influenced by the manufacturers. I say what I want to say, so take that for what it is. And of course, guys, before we jump into the video, comment down below and let me know what boards you want me to review next. And if there's anything that you feel like we might miss in this video, please comment down below and ask a question or leave a suggestion of something that we might have missed. But let's jump into the video. Now, of course, I'm going to be breaking the structure of this video down into categories as always, starting off with what's most important to me, which is going to be ride, speed, range. First thing is going to be the ride of this board. I feel like, I don't know how this is going to come across to a lot of you guys, but if you are fans of the Boosted board, the Exway Flex Pro is essentially what the Boosted board, I imagine, would be like if it was to have been released in 2022. Now, of course, it'd probably be priced at about $10,000 or £10,000 because Boosted board were on Mars with their pricing. But that's what I kind of feel like the Exway Flex Pro is like a reincarnation of. I was a massive fan of Boosted boards. I had no end of problems with those things, but I loved it. The flex of the deck, the way that the board felt when you were ripping through streets, carving, sliding on that board, just bouncing around as you're ripping through the streets, shredding through the streets. It was a feeling that I've really not been able to experience other than riding my old crappy Boosted board, which was overpriced and could only do about 5.5 miles or something like that. But it was just a sick board to ride. I feel like that feeling is what you get when you ride the Exway Flex Pro. Of course, when you look at the way it's constructed, its design, it kind of is very reminiscent of the Boosted board. The deck is a very different shape. It's also in a U concave. It's quite an aggressive U concave, but that's great for locking you in when you're kind of carving and throwing the board out side to side, doing quite deep carves. But if you're trying to do tricks like, you know, spin the board out 180s and drift the board around corners, I find that I would honestly prefer a slightly less aggressive U concave on the deck. I would prefer it to be quite flat, similar to the Boosted board for my personal riding style, but that's just food for thought. But the overall ride of this board is really, really nice. Now, in terms of the wheels, they're quite soft at 78A and 90 millimeters in circumference. It's good for kind of like rolling over terrain on streets, but as you guys know, I'm not gonna sit here and try and pretend that I would prefer to have a street wheeled board over an all-terrain board. You know what my stance is on that. But as street boards go with street wheels, this thing is a lot of fun to ride. If you're riding on nice smooth streets and asphalt, you'll have an incredible time. Now, in terms of the speed on this board, Exway advertised 28 miles an hour, which on this type of board, as short as it is with street wheels that are 90 millimeters, I'm not really gonna go that fast. Anything sort of above 25 is a bonus. So 28 is great in terms of what I could achieve with my body weight somewhere between 75 and 80 kilograms. I'm able to pretty much hit the top speed somewhere between 27 and 28 miles an hour. It also has the turbo mode feature on it that you can access through the remote, which is great. But the top speed is as advertised, which is always nice and refreshing. Now, something that we don't really talk about is kind of like the hill climbing capabilities, because we live in an area in the UK, Cambridgeshire, which is flat. We do go to London on a couple of occasions, and there are areas in London that have hills, but nothing where we can experiment with what they advertise, which I believe is 60% hill gradient, which is mental. The board has got crazy torque. It's using the same motors that were featured on the original Atlas, not the Atlas Pro, but the original Atlas. So for this type of board, it has oodles and oodles of torque and power, more so than you would ever need in a skateboard in this particular setup or configuration. But in terms of the hills and the bridges that we go over that are quite steep in London, zero problems going over those, which kind of leads quite nicely onto the range. Now, the range is advertised at 25 miles, which I feel is probably achievable, but it's a case of what settings did Exway do that in? How big was the rider? Is this going to be one of those instances where the rider was like 50 kilograms riding in the slowest mode? I don't know. But in terms of what I was able to get out of the board, it was somewhere between 14 and 16 miles. Now, that's quite a big difference off of the 25-mile mark that they've given or advertised on the website, but that's going to be down to how we ride. You know, when we get on a board, it's going to be put into the fastest mode, and this board has a lot of torque. I feel like obviously if you dropped down the settings in the app, which has been improved, there's a new Exway app, which is a lot easier to use, but it's a pain to sign in and connect to the boards. I definitely have to mention that. But when you get into the app, finally, you can adjust how much power you're feeding the board, which is gonna have an impact on your range. But if you're wondering what I got, it was somewhere between 14 and 16 miles, riding aggressively on a fairly mild day in London and also in Cambridge. But yeah, that's what I've been able to get out of it. Now, looking at the acceleration and of course the braking of this board. With the acceleration, the motors that this board has, I'll put all of the details on the screen so you can see what motors it has, the size of them, the capacity, all of that stuff that I don't really get into because it's always found on the manufacturer's website. I kind of want to talk about the things that you don't get to read on the website that you have to experience. But in terms of the acceleration, it's a two-wheel drive board, and I feel like it's more than you need. Getting off the line is not an issue with this board. It's really easy to wheel spin it, which kind of is testament to how much power you're able to put through the board. Now, this is just riding the board standard, not even messing with the settings on the app or taking the board into turbo mode. Literally just putting it to the highest gear mode or the highest mode on the board that you can access with the remote and just flooring it. The board will wheel spin. The braking is super aggressive as well. When you brake with the board, you can easily lock the wheels and have it slide as you're braking. So the braking is good, but of course 90mm street wheels, you need to bear in mind that if you're booking it round a corner, smooth roads, and you slam that brake on, it will stop aggressively, and it means that you might drift or slide a little bit, but the board stops more than what I would expect a board of this sort of configuration to be able to do. So acceleration and braking are great. Just bear in mind the type of board that you're in and how much leeway you need to give yourself and what you need to consider when you're slamming the brake on if you're mid-turn or trying to stop suddenly. But in terms of, is it quick off the line? Yes. Can it brake aggressively? Yes. In terms of charging this board, it takes somewhere around an hour to get the board from 0 all the way up to 100, but I'm not the type of rider that's ever going to get the board down to 0%. That happens very, very rarely, only like in worst case scenarios. So the charging on this board is pretty sick. I feel like it's a great board for anyone that, again, really loved the style of the boosted board, but needed way more range and way more power. If you remember what the boosted board did in terms of range, it was something pathetic like 5-6 miles, which is a joke considering the price, but it was such a nice looking board and such a great board to ride. This is like that, but on steroids. You get more than 3 times the range riding aggressively. You could probably do a lot more than that if you weren't riding so aggressively. And of course, you've got way, way, way more top speed. That leads really nicely onto the build and the appearance of the board. This board, I feel like across the board with the boards that we've received recently from Exway, they've really stepped up on their finish, their design. Everything sort of after the original Atlas has just been designed so well. They've kind of, in my opinion, taken themselves down from the mid-range, maybe lower end tier of board manufacturers all the way up to the top. They can easily compete with anyone else that's out there on the market making boards at even a higher price point. The finish on their boards is incredible. You wouldn't expect this board to have a retail price of $949. Currently, I think it's on sale for $849. This could easily be sold for well over $1,000, and I personally wouldn't bat an eyelid looking at the way that this board looks and of course the performance that you get out of the board. So the build quality, the twist trucks, the battery enclosure, the motor control enclosure, and where all of the other electronics are, the way that the motors are encased, even the positioning of them, the wheels, the deck itself, everything just looks premium. Even how they've color coordinated the bushings with their logo, I think that's kind of cool. I know they've done that for a while, but I really do appreciate that. And it has kind of like a little guard on the nose of the board and also the tail of the board, so if you're standing it up, you don't actually scratch or damage the deck. It's little things like that at a price point that you wouldn't really expect to get for the price of $949 and $849 right now because it's on sale. So overall, the design, the look, the finish, the build, blown away. Exway have yet again done it with this board. I feel like they're really pushing what they're creating and are easily comparable to much, much higher priced boards on the market right now. So massive round of applause to Exway. Now, of course, that leads us nicely onto the remote of the board. You guys know how I feel about scroll wheel remotes versus trigger remotes. I prefer a trigger, but the scroll wheel remote is something you do adjust to. This remote is exactly what you see with the Atlas Pro. It's just standard. It shows you what you need on the screen in terms of the battery percentage. I preferred the older way. When I had the Exway Flex, it showed you percentage rather than blocks of battery. I'll always prefer percentage. I feel like it's just more accurate, but that's obviously my preference. It also has the odometer, so you can see how much miles you're clocking on the board. It shows you the remote's battery, the board's battery, everything that you would expect to see, as well as, of course, the information about how fast you're going. For whatever reason, similar to my Exway Atlas Pro, even if I change it in the settings, I can't get it to show me miles an hour versus kilometers an hour. But again, I'll mention that the board we're looking at is pre-production. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I just thought I'd mention that. So the remote's pretty standard. There's not really much to it. You can adjust adjust a lot of the settings inside the board as well. It has, if you hold down the remote when you're turning it on for, I think it's about 7 or 8 seconds, takes you into settings, so you can adjust a lot on the actual board before you turn it on. And of course, you've got Exway's new app to be able to adjust things and refine them a little bit more in detail, like for example, the braking curve, the acceleration curve, all of that good stuff. Now, when we look at disadvantages of this board, for me, the only real one is the fact that this is a great board for what it does. And I believe in terms of a street board that has a flexible deck, I don't know of anything at the same price point or even higher that can compete with this board in terms of the build, the finish, the performance, and the way it looks. I don't think there's anything out there that can compete. If you think I'm wrong, please comment down below and let me know, because I'd love to take a look at that board. But I feel like Exway have really hit it out the park with this one. But in terms of the disadvantages, it's just not a board for me. This board is phenomenal. And who do I think this board would be aimed at? Like I said, you love the booster board, this would be great. The way that I ride and the board that I prefer has since evolved, and I prefer to go for, excuse the pun, I prefer to go for boards that have all-terrain wheels. And of course, if I'm riding with Ricky, I need a 4x4 board because I need that power. But I need all-terrain. That's going to be what I need. The type of place that I feel like this board really fits in is going to be if you're in a city, you have nice smooth roads, you're using it as a vehicle to get to and from work. I'm not going to refer to it as a last mile vehicle, because if you're doing over sort of 15 miles in range when you're abusing the board, that's not really a last mile vehicle. You could get around a city. It's got quick charging, so you can charge up when you stop at work or when you stop for a coffee to get you back and forth. Great for students to get around classes or campuses. This is just an all-round board that fits the type of person that needs something quick, that has good power, good acceleration, good top speed, and is portable and light. I think that's the main thing. A lot of these all-terrain boards are big and, in my opinion, heavy and clunky, but whereas the Exway Flex Pro is something that you can quickly pick up, run up a massive flight of stairs, squeeze in through a train, sit with it on your lap while you're on a bus. When you have things like, you know, big all-terrain boards like the Atlas Pro, those aren't boards that you can do that with as conveniently. I could pick up the Flex Pro with one hand and hold it out. You cannot do that with the all-terrain boards, and I feel like that's where this board really shines. Somebody that needs something that's easy to move around but still has power and range, this would be a good board to look at. But aside from that, there's not really much that I can say that's negative about this board. It's value for money wise, it's a joke. They could have charged easily twice as much for this board, and I feel like it would have still been a fair price. So what more can I say? Now, of course, I can't go any further in the video without talking about servicing. It's exactly the same as if you saw the Atlas Pro video. I'll link that down below if you haven't seen that review. But it's a case of what happens if something goes wrong with these boards, because the manufacturers aren't based in Europe or America, they're based in China. Is it a case of emailing and going back and forth and triaging to find out what's wrong with the board? And if it's a motor that's gone, they send you the part out and then you have to repair it yourself. This is something that is always going to be up in the air when you're looking at manufacturers like this. But I know from what I've heard and what I've been reading, Exway have really stepped up their customer service skills, but there's only so much you can do if you don't have a service center in the country that the board is being sold in. So I think that's kind of like always going to be one that's up in the air, and it's going to be a video that I have to touch on in more detail later. But in terms of that, I think that's kind of as far as I can go with that until I experience an issue with this board or any other Exway board and then have to go through the process. Then I can give you more feedback. But if anyone does have feedback about dealing with issues in terms of like a broken board or a damaged board with Exway and their customer service, please comment down below and let me know so we can share that experience with anyone else that's watching this video. As always, guys, a big thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If there's anything that I left out, please leave your comments down below or questions and I'll try and get to them as quickly as I can. If there's any boards you want me to review next, please leave them down below in the comment section. Big thank you for watching. Please continue to thumbs up and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.